Welcome to the AL.com Auburn pregame show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. I am Wes Sinor, joined by our Auburn beat writer Tom Green, and we're here to discuss a very big game for Auburn, a very big test for Auburn as they travel to Athens, Georgia to take on the number 2 Georgia Bulldogs. They're the defending champions, and Auburn has obviously had some struggles this season. So, Tom, just overall thoughts on this trip for Auburn, and kind of how important you think it is for Brian Harsin.
I mean, it's certainly a big game. First road game of the season isn't any walk in the park by any means necessary. You had kind of 5-game homestand to start the year to kind of try to work out some of the kinks, and clearly there's still things that Auburn's trying to figure out, especially offensively in the second half of games. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't get much more difficult than your first road game being against one of your biggest rivals in a very hostile environment. And they're the number 2 team in the country and the defending national champion.
Right. And I know that there's been a lot of obviously a lot of talk about Brian Harsin and job security there. It seems like it's something that comes up every single week almost at this point. Just in your opinion, I mean, is this come down to a must-win situation for Brian Harsin? Do you think he can lose this game and keep going at it, going into the Ole Miss next week? Or what is your opinion on the situation?
At this point, it really does feel like every game is a must-win for him. And I mean, this is a monumental task. I mean, Auburn's a 28, 30-point underdog, depending on where you're looking at it. As far as I know, that is the biggest underdog point spread for Auburn in like at least a decade, and the largest in this series history. And furthest back I could find was 1997, and there wasn't one bigger than this between these two teams. Wow. So it is a very monumental task. Nobody's really given Auburn much of a chance, especially considering the way they've struggled in the second half of games and just on the road in this series since they last won in Georgia in 2005. Their last 5 trips there, they haven't scored more than 10 points. I believe one of our fellow members of the beat, Justin Ferguson, pointed out that the last 2 Auburn players to throw a touchdown at Sanford Stadium were running back Boobie Whitlow and tight end CJ Uzama. So the offense has not been able to do much over there. This certainly does feel like a must win. And, even if they don't win, I think if they can, show marked improvement on offense and maybe kind of figure out some of those second half issues and keep this game close, I think Brian Harsin might be able to buy himself some more time. But it just feels, almost imminent at this point. Like I said, it's a week-to-week thing. I mean, it's become a question every week since that Penn State game, which kind of erased all the goodwill that he kind of built back up over the offseason.
Right. You mentioned that 2005 game. I was actually at that game. Crazy ending to that. Brandon Cox hit a receiver on like 4th down, and they fumbled like forward into the end zone. And it just feels like forever ago that Auburn's struggles in Athens have really lasted a long time. And I know they had that similar streak against LSU that they were able to finally break. But now I think that Georgia streak is starting to become like that LSU one where it was like 20 years where they hadn't won in Baton Rouge. So we're quickly
Georgia's the new LSU for them.
Yeah. Speaking of just some improvements on the offensive side, I know that Robbie Ashford obviously had his best performance against LSU last week. Where do you think the offense is heading with Robbie Ashford, assuming he's going to still be in, be the starter with Finley injured?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest positives that, they kind of took away from, Robbie's start last week was just that downfield passing attack, which, we hadn't seen so much of this season. Obviously Javarius Johnson had a couple big catches early in the year, but, they were able to really get vertical last week with Robbie. And some of those biggest plays came where he was able to kind of buy himself some time, scramble out of the pocket and just keep his eyes downfield and, find receivers. So I think that's certainly something that they can kind of build off of moving forward and try to get some more out of. But they need to improve that short passing attack because, he was really inconsistent on short attempts, and they need to get that run game going because, as Brian Harsin kind of put it the other day, it was basically feast or famine for them. They would get some, 6, 8, 10-yard runs, but then they'd get loss of 2 yards, a loss of 3 yards, no gain, something like that. So they really need to find some more consistency there. And whether that means getting Robbie a little bit more involved in the run game because he brings that element to the game, or just getting Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter downhill and let them do their thing. But that offensive line has just really struggled to create a push up front there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the offensive line, Brandon Council had some comments earlier this week about how he felt like Auburn could perform against Georgia. I'm going to just play this clip real quick. Just some comments from Auburn offensive line and Brandon Council about this week's game.
We have the chance to go out there and do something that hasn't been done in a long time, and that's beat Georgia at Georgia. And I believe the last time was in 2005. That'd be a big thing. So our goal is to go in there like a SWAT team, in and out, quiet the noise, beat their behinds and get up. You start off fast and run the ball on them and keep them out of their third down packages. Really, we could demolish them, I believe, personally, up front.
So obviously this got some attention. He's saying he wants, the strategy here is to go in like a SWAT team and quiet the noise, and then feels like he can demolish Georgia's defensive line. I mean, what do you make of his comments, and how do you feel like that, that matchup on the line is going to play out?
Well, you certainly have to respect the confidence there. And look, I'm not the type of person that believes in, bulletin board material. I mean, what's going to happen? You're going to say something and the team's going to go out and beat you harder. It's a rivalry game. I enjoy, kind of the banter that comes with it sometimes. Again, I respect Brandon Council's confidence. He's coming off his first start at center. He feels like the offensive line performed a little bit better against LSU, and that they have something that they can build off of. But that some of that confidence does feel a little misguided just because of how inconsistent Auburn's offensive line has been this year.
Right.
They've not been able to get a consistent push in the run game. Their pass protection has struggled as well. They're giving up like 3 sacks a game. But yeah, I mean, you have to appreciate the confidence that he's showing there.
Sure.
Part of it is that Georgia will be without Jalen Carter. It's preseason All-American and likely first-round pick right there in the middle of the line. So I get it. He thinks that the guys behind him aren't as good, which they probably aren't as good. But Georgia still has 10, 11 blue chip guys on that defensive line just because they've been able to recruit at such a high level.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's certainly interesting comments that kind of raised a lot of eyebrows on Wednesday when he said them. But they feel like they might be able to see a weakness there in Georgia's defensive front. I mean, Georgia has looked human the last 2 weeks against Kent State and then Missouri. They trailed Missouri until those final 5 minutes, and we saw how Auburn played against Missouri. So if you're going based off of similar opponents there, Auburn's got to have a little bit of confidence based on what Missouri was able to do last week.
Now, kind of going over to the other side of the ball, how do you feel like Auburn's defense kind of matches up against Georgia's offense, especially after, last week? Obviously, Auburn got off to a strong start there with a 17-point lead, and they end up blowing that lead and losing 21-17. So just if you could speak a little bit about the Auburn defense and kind of where you feel like they're at right now.
I mean, the defense has been playing pretty solid, all things considered. You look in SEC play, they've only given up 14 points per game against, Missouri and LSU because, obviously LSU had a defensive touchdown of its own. Missouri only had those 14 points in the second quarter there 2 weeks ago. So the defense has really played well. They've gotten a little bit more consistent with their pass rush. Still need to figure out some things in the run game, but the secondary has done better at not, getting beat on those one-on-one assignments downfield. I think the real question here is, how effective can that pass rush be without Eke Leota? Auburn lost him likely for the season to a pectoral injury. And that was a position that they already didn't have much depth at behind Derek Hall and Eke Leota. So you're going to, Derek Hall is going to have to carry a little bit more of that load. We saw Marcus Bragg step in last week and he performed pretty well, coming in for Leota. But, beyond that, all they really have is Dylan Brooks, a redshirt freshman who was highly touted coming out of high school, but, just hasn't seen the field much. Expect to see maybe some more Colby Wooden coming off the edge. That's a role that he played early on in his career, his first couple seasons, before he kind of bulked up and became more of that kind of interior tweener, and defensive tackle type guy. But he's a guy who has shown the ability to get a consistent pass rush at whatever position you put him at on the line. So I'd expect to see him play a little bit more outside, and them kind of play with some options there to try to keep generating that pass rush, because they're gonna need to make Stetson Bennett uncomfortable, and kind of contain that run game if they want to stand a chance over there in Georgia today.
You mentioned Stetson Bennett. Obviously, everybody knows who that is. But is there another guy for Georgia that you feel like Auburn fans should be paying attention to today? Maybe somebody not as well known as Stetson.
Yeah, I'd say tight end Brock Bowers. Dude is just a freak, really. He can kind of do it all. You don't really see teams run sweeps to their tight end and have it go off for a long touchdown. And we saw that a couple weeks ago with Brock Bowers. I think it was against South Carolina. They use him in a variety of ways. He's just got all the tools, and they have a lot of really good tight ends in that room, but he is the cream of the crop. And I was talking to a Georgia beat reporter earlier in the week, and he mentioned a lot of people think if there's a Heisman contender on that Georgia team, that Stetson Bennett's going to be the guy, but don't sleep on Brock Bowers, because what he's able to do at that position and just the versatility he brings really, kind of makes that offense a lot more diverse.
Right. Well, I just got one last question for you. I was going to ask for your prediction for this game. Obviously, a rivalry game. A lot of Georgia players on Auburn's roster, a lot of Alabama players on Georgia's roster, probably. Deep South's oldest rivalry. How do you think this one plays out for Auburn today?
Yeah, I haven't really put much thought into an actual score. I do think a 28-30 point spread is really difficult for anybody to cover, especially when you're talking about a rivalry game, a conference game. I think Auburn is going to try to do what it can to keep it close, especially in the first half. But this team needs to find ways to fix its issues in that middle eight, the last 4 minutes of the first half, the first 4 minutes of the second half, because they've been getting demolished in that area, and just find a way to score after halftime. Because if they can't do that, this game can get very ugly. Because Georgia's been a team that's been a lot better in the second half of games. So we'll see. I think Georgia is going to win this one. I think they're going to win it pretty comfortably. But let's see if Auburn can keep it close going into that second half there.
All right, Tom, I appreciate your time this morning. Obviously, you can find all of Tom's work at AL.com. We're going to have highlights, press conferences, everything, all the usual stuff after today's game. But Tom, again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you after the game. Well, we won't see you after the game, but we'll see some of the viewers after the game for our post-game show.
Yeah, and I'll see you at
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.